let's do this. Let's do this Jabsen Engels debate, or segment, or whatever you want to call this disaster. So Jabsen Engels went on Piers Morgan's program. You can see the Titantron says Putin's fanboys. The warmongering dictator is gaining popularity online. A lot of this popularity, if you would ask me, is just aesthetics. It's just Putin is somebody who like rode on horseback and like did it without his shirt, and all of the people who said I would never fall for Western American Yankee doodle dandy propaganda to make me stand and say to pledge and fall for that government deep state Pentagon nonsense, then looked at the most surface level basic propaganda from another country and then immediately fell head over heels for it. Because look at them, they're the contrarian, they're the Tom Clancy hero, they have Tom Clancy syndrome, they have the deep secret truth nobody else in the West has, and they get to like play into like the ooh la la authoritarian vibes. And somebody, and I bring this up specifically because Jabsen Engels is a perfect showing of that. If you look at all the people that like he praises and the people around him praise, it's always dictators, always people like Kim Jong-un, always people like Xi Jinping, Putin, people who really don't have a huge love for freedom and the things that you would assume a patriotic American, which he claims himself to be, would be very in favor of. So I always found it very strange, this type of politics, mostly because I couldn't imagine getting interested in politics and basically being like the wearaboos immediately, just being like, who has the coolest uniforms? I'm with you. I'm with you. Your leader is cool and on horseback. My leader is old and falls down. Your system is so superior. Definitely after seeing how well the Russian system has performed in Ukraine. Anyway, let's watch this. Let's watch somebody that has denied the war crimes in Bucha and has lied about war crimes that the Russian government has committed. Somebody who is a full-time propagandist for the Russians, right? Let's see how he does on Piers Morgan tonight. Hopefully Piers is ready for him. Because quite frankly, I think a lot of these people kind of assume that talking to somebody who acts as a propagandist for dictatorships in the West would be easy, but a lot of times they concentrate the entirety of their being on focusing on one or two subjects. And so if you're Piers Morgan and you're preparing for like 20 segments and this is only gonna be 5 minutes, you might not treat it with any importance. Let's see how he does.
Jabsen Engels, a conservative commentator and YouTuber with 260,000 subscribers.
Conservative commentator. Hey, and you know what's interesting about this? Usually they ask you in advance to give like what's your intro. These types of shows will ask you, how would you like yourself described? I went on Polish TV a few times and it's usually like that. So I assume that means when they ask Jabsen Engels, how would you describe yourself? Oh, a conservative commentator. I mean, I'm making this assumption. Obviously I don't know this for sure, but I remember when he was the Bernie bro. So he's made the full transition now, has he? Well, I support his transition.
Jabsen Engels, a conservative commentator and YouTuber with 260,000 subscribers, is a prominent voice in this pro-Putin community. He recently tweeted, Putin has God on his side in his quest to defeat NATO Satanists. So why is he saying all this? Well, let's ask him. Joining me now is the Putin fan, YouTuber Jabsen Engels, and the Russian-British host of the Trigonometry podcast, Konstantin Kisin. Okay, well, welcome to both of you. Jabsen, I don't get it. Vladimir Putin invaded illegally a democratic sovereign country, has wreaked total mayhem. He's killed innocent women, children. He's bombed maternity hospitals. He's been on a barbaric rampage. Why would you choose this moment to revere him?
I would choose this moment because most of what is said about Vladimir Putin in the mainstream press by talking heads like yourself is just factually not true, just like everything that people like you said about COVID. The fact of the matter is...
Okay, so what did he say about COVID? You can't just vaguely mention, like, you're the mainstream press. What you said about COVID was lies. Everything the mainstream press is lies. It's just a reverse appeal to authority. I always hated stuff like this. Like, well, they lied once, they'll lie again. It's just a reverse appeal to authority. Like this, the people that you don't trust said it. It must not be true, right? And he hasn't even established that what he said about COVID was wrong, because I don't know what Piers Morgan said about COVID. Not really a Piers Morgan viewer.
This war that everyone talks about, that so-called started on February 24, 2022, actually began in 2014 after the U.S. led a violent coup on the Ukrainian government that was democratically elected.
We didn't overthrow the Ukrainian government. We didn't lead the coup. We didn't even want a coup. In fact, when asked, Victoria Nuland in the famous phone call that people always reference to try to, like, you know, say that we were controlling everything behind the scenes, they explicitly said that they wanted the Ukrainian protesters to accept the deal that was being offered by the Poroshenko regime. Then the protesters went against what the United States wanted and continued the protests because they didn't want to compromise on their democracy or on the fact that Poroshenko had sold out his country to the Russians by pulling out of the association agreement, which the majority of Ukrainians wanted, and he promised to enter on the campaign trail. They were protesting against him for that. They weren't being controlled by the West. We hadn't thrown enough money into the country to really do a real coup. We didn't give guns to anyone. What did our money do that produced a coup? That's always the interesting question. Follow up with, where did the money go? And then how did that create a coup? That's always my favorite follow-up question. Because when you actually look at the money the United States gave Ukraine, it's over issues like human trafficking, anti-corruption efforts, border patrol. It's a whole host of different topics when they talk about the billions and billions we funneled into Ukraine over over a decade of bilateral ties. Yanukovych, not Poroshenko. Yeah, the Poroshenko government came after Yanukovych. Yeah.
When people, specifically ethnic Russians in the Donbass, decided that they didn't want a U.S.-installed puppet government filled with Nazis, they vocalized their opinions. And for that, they were met with violence and aggression by the Ukrainian government.
When he says voice their opinions, what he means is the Russians invaded Crimea, and then in eastern Ukraine, people, separatists, started seizing government buildings. So I would like to hear from Jabsen Engels, what would happen if, say, somebody in Russia tried to seize a government building? Would they say, I don't know, go down there and be like, oh, well, you know what? Maybe we will create an independent Chechnya. Maybe we will create an independent. No, they would not do that. They would say, oh, you're trying to separate from the country, which has not been voted on, and you're very obviously being funded by a foreign power and given guns and weapons from a foreign power. The weapons that these separatists had don't just fall out of the sky. They had to come from somewhere, Jabsen. They responded to these buildings being taken over militarily with their own military force, with their own military response. And then the Russians supported the separatists, and Ukrainians fought against the separatists. I mean, no one would, I mean, this, you know what this sounds like to me? This sounds like the northern aggression against the South, even though who fired the first shot on Fort Sumter, and what was the underlying values behind the conflict that brought the North and South against each other?
Who slaughtered?
He's not going to discuss about the buildings getting seized. He's not going to spend too much time about the Crimean parliament being overtaken and their politicians being held at gunpoint, as admitted to Igor Girkin on Russian TV. He's not going to talk about any of that. He's not going to talk about that prelude. He's not going to talk about the years of buildup as the Russians fomented corruption, as the Russians used economic coercion leading up to Euromaidan, which started the whole protest movement in the first place. It was Russian interference, which they doubled down on once everything started to kick off. He's not going to talk about any of that because all those facts, again, are inconvenient. I talked about this last segment. The worst type of liars and the worst types of propagandists are not the people who just make up complete bullshit. It'll be the people who, even though Jabsen Engels also makes up complete bullshit and just a straight up lie like he did about Bucha, but it's the people who lie, but then will drop in a few true things, but leave out very important information. Leave out very important context, right? A good example of this would be like, let's say that I said, hey, we had improved American manufacturing a gigantic amount. And then I used a specific example by saying we had produced 20 to 30% increased in profits from manufactured furniture. Look, isn't that a great example of how we brought back American manufacturing? But I left out the information that there had actually been a 40 to 30 to 50% decrease in American manufacturing jobs. That is hiding a lie in a truth. The truth is, okay, yeah, you increase manufacturing jobs specifically in manufactured furniture. The lie is the fact that you're using that to portray it as if there was a general increase in manufacturing jobs. And by him just bringing up the fact that the Ukrainians did send a military into eastern Ukraine makes it look like it was aggression towards eastern Ukraine, when he didn't include the fact that government buildings were being seized by armed separatists, the Russians were moving into Crimea and funneling weapons into the Donbass.
Them for 8 years. 15,000 people died in this fighting while Putin tried to achieve peace through the
He funneled weapons into the conflict. If you're going to say that America funneling weapons into Ukraine is not bringing about peace, and that's warmongering, which he did at the Rage Against War Machine rally, you can't say it's bringing about peace when the Russians do it.
Minsk Accords and the Minsk II Accords, all of which ended up being rejected by the Ukrainian government at the behest of Germany and the United States.
By the way, the Russians never abided by the Minsk. By the way, the Ukrainian government and Russia signed the Minsk Accords, and then neither side abided by it. And he'll never include this information, but the Russians were supposed to withdraw their armies. They never did.
The Ukrainian government continued to push forward despite the fact that Putin wanted peace, and they said that they wanted to join NATO. They said they wanted to have nukes right on Russia's border.
Why? Okay, two things. Number one, if Russia invades Ukraine in 2014 and is aggressing upon it, it's not that surprising that the nation state would want to join an alliance that was specifically designed to stop countries from being invaded by Russia, right? That's not that surprising. Any country would do it in Ukraine's position. If you were in a country and that country was at threat of being invaded by a foreign power that was threatening to do it or leveraging that against you and had a history of invading your country, any country in that position, if it could ally with a larger alliance that would stop that invasion, and has proven in every other instance to stop that invasion, like in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, with Russia, if you listen to Putin's speech, he makes it very clear that any post-Soviet state's on the chopping block. But because of NATO membership, that has stopped it. That has stopped those nations from being invaded. So getting angry at the Ukrainian people being part of NATO, when it's a very logical conclusion for them to get to after Russia has acted the way it has acted, I think that's silly. And it's even, the support for NATO has gone up since the Russian invasion. So it seems that the Ukrainian people don't seem to agree with Jabsen that NATO is the culprit here. Putting that aside, what was the other thing he said?
And they said that they wanted to join NATO. They said they wanted to have nukes right on Russia's border.
Honestly, if Ukraine said we want nukes, how much could you blame them? And I know that might sound crazy on first inspection, but Ukraine gave up its nukes, signed the Budapest Memorandum. In response to that, the government of the United States and Russia said, we will not invade you, we will respect your territorial integrity, and we will defend you if your territorial integrity is threatened, if you give up its nuclear arsenal. This was part of a denuclearization process the world was going through after the Cold War ended. And this was something the world asked of Ukraine for the safety of everyone. And Ukraine delivered on it. But Russia did not deliver on what it promised to in that agreement and invaded them. And so Ukrainian politicians have acknowledged, including Zelensky, that if they had nukes, there's a pretty decent chance the Russians wouldn't have invaded due to the threat that nukes pose. Kim Jong-un, good example, probably went for nukes for a bunch of reasons. One of them is probably to protect his regime. And that's a lesson that a lot of world leaders and countries are taking right now, is that if you have nukes, you don't get invaded. You don't have nukes, you could get invaded. You could get attacked. You could get conquered. Your people could be wiped off the map. It's a powerful weapon that stops invasion. It's a powerful deterrent. And so if the Ukrainians signed an agreement that they fulfilled, that they would give up their nukes if they weren't invaded, and now they've been invaded, Zelensky was merely acknowledging at a conference that now, morally, Ukraine would have the right to go back and get its nukes. Ukraine never said that I was going to get its nukes back. What he is referencing is a statement from Zelensky in the months leading up to the war, where he said because Ukraine had given up its nuclear arsenal in return for its territory being respected, and its territory is not being respected, why would you expect Ukraine to not want to get nukes, to not want to go back on that agreement? It was basically requesting, hey, we went through on our end of the bargain, deliver for us. But instead, it's now being manipulated by Jabsen Engels, because he's a hack propagandist, into, no, the Ukrainians were saying that they were plotting to get a nuke to bomb Russia. No, it's ridiculous.
And because of that, Putin stepped in and said, hey, look, we're going to stop the bloodshed.
Also, are we going to hear from Jabsen Engels that we can invade countries to stop the development of weapons of mass destruction? Is that a precedent he might not want to set when you're talking about maybe a second Trump term and Iran being in the picture? Or what about the whole impetus for America invading Iraq, which I know is something that he opposed? Whatever. Don't need to sit down and think of the logic at all. Just keep on going through, getting that Putin money. Getting that contrarian money.
We're going to stop the NATO escalation. We're going to stop the risk of potentially this unfolding into a full-fledged nuclear war.
He's going to stop the risk of nuclear war by actively invading Ukraine and causing more tension with other nuclear armed powers. He's going to stop a nuclear war by invading a country that had no pathway to join NATO or deploy nukes in its territory. Okay, that's silly. That's silly. Unless Jabsen Engels believes the biological weapons nonsense. And the last time I debated him on this, it did seem like he did believe it. By the way, a year and a half into the war, still don't have any evidence of the biological weapons that the Russians claimed. Remember when they said at the start of the war, weapons of mass destruction, these biological weapons. And none of the people who would have been, at least from listening to them now, the main critics of the American invasion of Iraq, oh, this weapons of mass destruction lie, they ate it up so quickly when it came to Russia, or didn't even reflect upon the fact that they were repeating a very similar lie that many of us should remember, probably cooked up in part due to the fact that it sounded similar to the lie that the Bush administration pushed.
Unfolding into a full-fledged...
What was the other thing you said?
We're going to stop the NATO escalation. We're going to stop...
Well, also more nation states have joined NATO with Sweden and Finland, so it also just failed on that front completely, I would say.
Stop the risk.
Not to mention, most NATO states are now increasing their military budgets. Again, failed if that was his intention, completely backfired. And if that was his intention, all he has to do now, he knows the solution, turn around and leave Ukraine. You de-escalate very quickly.
Of potentially this unfolding into a full-fledged nuclear war, and we're going to do what needs to be done. We're going to...
Also, if Ukraine had bioweapons, why haven't they used it yet? Why haven't they used these bioweapons to, like, kill all the Russians? If they had them, why are they holding them? There's been a lot of battles they could have used them. Defensive Kiev, defensive Kharkiv counteroffensive. Hell, I mean, the counteroffensive in Zaporozhye isn't going at 100 miles a second, is it? That could be a useful place to use it, but they haven't used it. Almost like they didn't exist.
Liberate the ethnic Russians in Ukraine. We're going to denatofy Ukraine, and we're going to denazify Ukraine.
All right, I've given you a good...
Okay. He's going to liberate the ethnic Russians. I assume he means of life, since the #1 population that is dying in this war are Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine, who are the vast majority of casualties, which Russia said they were invading to protect, but now they're dying at higher numbers because of the bombs and conflict that the Russians caused by invading. Saying that they're going to denatofy it is interesting because they've pushed Ukraine closer to NATO, and now they've given them a more clear pathway to NATO, and now we have NATO publicly saying that the future of Ukraine is within NATO, so they've pushed them closer to NATO. And denazify Ukraine, it's very hard to take that seriously, and I brought this to Jabsen Engels' attention last time we debated, but Russia has neo-Nazi militias fighting and occupying territory in Ukraine, like Rusich, which is an explicit neo-Nazi militia, which its founder said, I don't want to splice words. I don't want to beat around the bush. I am not a nationalist. I am a Nazi. That's his words. That's what he said. So it's kind of hard to take a denazification operation very seriously when you're deploying neo-Nazi militias.
Chance to...
It's almost like it was just a piece of propaganda and never something they took terribly seriously.
Answer there. I've got to say, a lot of that I thought was a crock of crap. Genuinely, the connection went down, so there's no conspiracy. We weren't trying to silence you. Look, I just find it odd. I mean, for argument's sake, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, did you feel that he was a peace-loving guy that we should be instinctively supporting, or did you agree?
Fake Alec Kyle Parker has donated $10. I think we should adopt a 20s-style parliament system, where members of parliament brawl with each other.
That's good. I think more politicians should fight.
Did you feel that he was a peace-loving guy that we should be instinctively supporting, or did you agree with American conservatives then that what should actually happen is Desert Storm and General Schwarzkopf should be leading the American charge to repel him? And if you felt the latter, why would you feel differently about someone like Putin doing this in Ukraine?
Well, the interesting thing here is that Jabsen Engels, for his age, looks very old. He looks like he's in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, probably. I mean, if somebody said late 20s, I think that'd be believable. But the dude's actually only a year older than me. He's 23, I'm 22. So I think this question was said not knowing that Jabsen Engels was just not alive at the time. But I mean, the dude, I mean, he dresses like he's in his, like, you know, he's an older gentleman, doesn't he? He dresses, kind of presents himself that way. Just looks at, you know, just looks up there a bit.
Well, I don't know if you know, Pierce, I'm only 23 years old, so I didn't have fully fledged opinions on that at the time. But what I think is very interesting is for all the Western officials that are so outraged over what Putin is doing in Ukraine, why were they not outraged over what NATO did to Yugoslavia or what?
Why isn't he responding to Piers Morgan's question? He asked about General Schwarzkopf and the liberation of Kuwait. I thought it was a very succinct question. Do you believe it made sense for the United States to push back Saddam's armies when they invaded Kuwait? People don't talk about the Kuwait war that much because in the grand scheme of things, when you talk about the invasion of Iraq in 2003, it seems pretty insignificant. And it kind of happened with very little opposition when it comes to like the international community. China and Russia, for example, abstained. They didn't object to the intervention. They didn't participate, but they kind of just like took a step back and just kind of let it happen, right? Because they acknowledged that Saddam Hussein was damaging international oil markets and energy markets by invading Kuwait to get away from paying their debts that they had accrued during the Iran-Iraq war. And they were trying to steal Kuwaiti oil and engage in a war of conquest. The rest of the region disagreed with that. The whole world disagreed with that. And then an international coalition participated to force them out of Kuwait. And instead of answering this question, which would take some acumen and foreign policy knowledge, you know, some history about the region. And I've talked to him about the Middle East before. We talked about Syria. The entirety of his knowledge about Syria, from my time talking to him, maybe he's changed since then. I know he has taken money from a pro-Bashar al-Assad lobby group, but apparently when he took that money, he was not studying much on Syria. He didn't know much about it. All he knew was about gas attacks. When I asked him about the 2004 football protests, anything else, he didn't have very surface level knowledge about everything. I don't even think he knew much about Hafez al-Assad, Assad's father, or like the legacy. My point is, Jabsen Engels, and I think this might be due to his age, but I don't think that's a really good excuse because he was talking to me at the time and I'm younger than him. Or just a lack of experience or a lack of effort. He doesn't know a lot about many of the topics he discusses, like Middle East geopolitics. And so what you need to watch for is sometimes when they ask for specifics about a conflict like this, he'll just kind of pivot away and not talk about it. Like what happened when I tried to discuss many of the things concerning Taiwan and Syria in my debate with him. Like I would respect it a lot more if he was just like, oh, I don't really know much about this. And then just kind of like moved on. He could just say that. He said he wasn't alive at the time, but he could still respond to the question. Like the invasion of Iraq happened when I was 3, or I think 2. I forget exactly when, but I was like 2 or 3. If somebody asked me, do I support the invasion of Iraq? I would say no, and then I can give the reasons why. In fact, it should be easier for him to answer this question because he has hindsight. So he could literally design his answer better than the people who had to give an answer at the time because he knows how the war ended. But he doesn't anyway because he just doesn't know anything about it. That's all.
NATO did to Libya or what the United States did in Iraq and Afghanistan or Syria.
We're trying to talk about Iraq, and you're not talking about Iraq.
The United States drone operation program in Africa had a 95%.
Again, it's not talking. This has to do with Kuwait. Like the drone program, you know, these strikes against al-Shabaab and stuff this has nothing to do with the conquest of territory. Anti-terrorism operations, which you can object to. You can object to the drone war. This is a totally separate subject than the liberation of Kuwait and or the conquest of territory.
Civilian death rate. For everyone to be so up in
What did he say?
program in Africa had a 95% civilian death rate.
That's just a lie. Number one, I know what lie he's referencing. It's from an Intercept article. Now, the Intercept article talks about one 6-month time period in Yemen.
Fake Alec Kyle Parker gifted 5 Tier 1 subscriptions. NPC dialogue.
Thank you. It is NPC dialogue. It's all of this is just dialogue trees. He doesn't know anything about the topic, so he gets into his dialogue tree and start listing off every single foreign conflict America's ever been in response to not knowing anything about the liberation of Kuwait or liberation struggles, because he doesn't know anything about it. Thank you for the 5 gifts to tier 1s. But I think what he's trying to reference is an Intercept article that said that there was a specific drone operation that we engaged in that in 90% of the strikes that occurred, civilians were hurt and or killed. And this was one specific drone operation, I believe in Yemen. I don't even know if it was in Africa. I think it was in Yemen, which would be Asia. But the number one was not 95, it was 90. And number 2, that was one drone operation in one 6-month time period. Now, I'm not trying to defend it. That's still bad, but that's still a long ways off from 95% of the deaths from our drone striking operations in Africa are civilian casualties, which I would love to see a source on that. That's almost certainly entirely made up.
For everyone to be so up in arms over...
It's just like a ridiculous number. It's just like a comically ridiculous number.
Putin liberating these ethnic Russians in Ukraine from Nazis is just...
liberating them from the Nazis by sending them to the Nazis that are dead because they're dying and going to the afterlife. I don't know which direction. It depends on the person.
I have no...
Listen, Jackson, the trouble is...
I guess if they go down, they're going to hang out with the Nazis. If they go up, they go hang out with the non-Nazis.
Some of the stuff you said in your initial response is historically defensible. You can argue from 2014 there's been this issue there. I get that.
No, it isn't. No, it is. Again, this is the problem. Piers Morgan has such surface level knowledge. He has so surface level knowledge that he still can't deal with this guy.
Perfectly reasonable thing to say. But
no, it isn't.
You say that Putin's only game here is to go and liberate the Ukrainians from Nazis. You just sound completely bonkers. Bonkers. Not to say there aren't some far-right people with Nazi tendencies in Ukraine. There are, as there are in many countries. But the idea this is a Nazi-run country.
This is the strongest point that Piers Morgan can argue on, though. You don't need to have a lot of knowledge to just be like, dog, they're led by a Jew. I never heard of the Fourth Reich being led by a Jew. They instituted anti-discrimination. I doubt Piers Morgan knows this, but they instituted anti-discrimination protections for LGBT people in 2015. I don't remember the speech where Hitler was like, "We shall protect the transgenders in the workplace." That didn't happen. That's silly. That's silly on its face.
When the president is Jewish, never mind anything else, is laughably ridiculous.
Well, just because he's Jewish doesn't mean he's not sicking his Azov Nazi thugs on ethnic Russians in the Donbass.
He has to add every negative adjective to every sentence he pumps out. Literally born and bred propagandist.
Jewish president is going to be actively promoting Nazism. That's your position.
By the way, Zelensky, I think it was like 3 or 4 months ago. It happened when I was embedded with demining crews in Kharkiv. He celebrated the defeat of Nazi Germany, the triumph over Nazism, and celebrated Ukrainian Soviet soldiers who fought against the Nazi scourge, not because they were Soviet, but because they fought against Nazism. He takes Holocaust remembrance very seriously as somebody who's lost members of his family in the Holocaust. What Nazi laws have been passed in Ukraine? If it's a Nazi country, and there's a country of a particular ideology, you can usually see that in its laws, but it's not in its laws. There's some people in Ukraine, as it's fighting a war of survival in the Ukrainian military, who are far right, and in some instances, a part of that section, who are Nazis, which, by the way, also exists on the other side. And let me tell you, if the United States was invaded tomorrow and 1/5 of America was occupied, do you think American recruiting staff would be like, "Excuse me, so I would like to ask you, what's your beliefs about homosexual?" Do you think that would legitimately happen? Do you think the people who were like going into D-Day was like, "Okay, everyone, we're fighting for integration. Let's get in there"? No, that wasn't happening. A lot of those people were probably had objectionable views. But that doesn't make America a Nazi country. Because the ideology of America and its government were not Nazi. They weren't instituting Nazi laws. If this is the case, then any country with a far-right contingent can be called a Nazi country. And if that's the case, Russia's a Nazi country, Ukraine's a Nazi country, Germany's a Nazi country, America's a Nazi country, Canada's a Nazi country. Hell, depending on how you're describing like nationalism and far right, you could go to, I would say, maybe even the majority of countries on the planet, if we're not Nazi or fascist countries. It's it's a silly standard. It's a silly standard. You can call out a far-right contingent in the military without making hyperbolic statements, but that's how Jabsen Engels gets views, and that's how Jabsen Engels operates.
The ones with swastika tattoos and Hitler tattoos in Mariupol, for example.
You know what?
What about Dmitry Utkin, military commander of Wagner, giant swastika tattoo, SS tattoo? Was that guy with the big swastika tattoo going to come to Ukrainian villages and explain to them the evils of Adolf Hitler?
But what I'll say, Piers, one question.
As if they need that explanation.
One question. What I'll say is, if you're so outraged over the atrocities allegedly of Putin in Ukraine and all these Ukrainians that have been killed, and you tweet about it nonstop, why did you not tweet once about the atrocities that were perpetrated by the Ukrainian government from
all I would have to say is why not you, Jackson? You never talk about the atrocities committed by the Ukrainian government. You never talk about the atrocities committed by by the Russian government. He never talks about it. In fact, if he does, he'll only talk about it in the context of denying that it happened or saying that the Ukrainians did it. Is this like a say as I do, not say as I say, not as I like do as I say, not as I do situation? You know,
from 2014 to 2022 against those ethnic Russians in the Donbass.
Well, yeah, Constantine.
Well, my family are actually largely ethnic.
We can probably explore this in more detail. I mean,
wait, did he cut out? This is the Jabsen Engels edit. Did he cut out the people who actually like? It sounds like he was about to say he lived there and he has family member that's from there. My family's actually from this. Yeah, it was okay. He was about to say my family's largely ethnic Russians, and it sounds like he was about to push back on Jackson, and he cut it out in his edit. Well, that's not very honest. That seems a little deceitful. Are we getting the Jabsen Engels make him look good hypercut? I think that's what we're getting. Wait, this is supposed to make him look good. Okay. Dude's got no fire. Dude's got no fire. Dude's got 0 bars.
We explore this in more detail. I mean, Will Jackson, I've got no desire to censor you, to stop you having your views. You're entitled to them. I will challenge them. We ran out of time tonight, but I think we should do this again another time. You can have a platform here. We can talk about these things because a lot of people...
If you give him a platform, here's one thing. Be fucking prepared. This is Jabsen Engels supercuts. This is supposed to make him look good. But please be prepared when he says nonsense like that, and don't say, "Oh, you know, you had some historical points there." It just sounds like you wanted to both sides it for no reason. He purposely went online to fight somebody that he could describe as Putin's fanboy, and then just kind of gave him the historical narrative here. He was just unprepared.
Seem to agree with you, which I find baffling, but that's the reality. So thank you for joining Piers Morgan.
Good job, Piers. Fantastic reporting, as always. As for Jackson, I mean, he's gotten no better at what he does. I think he's hit a ceiling. I think he's not learning anything else. He's not learning anymore. He's just like what he was at the start of the war. Seems like he's got no new information, no new tricks up his sleeve. What's this? Chronic problems of Czech. We don't kidnap children, bomb hospitals, occupy neighbors, get out of Ukraine. Ooh. Damn. Damn. Got slaughtered. The longer cut? Is the longer cut on YouTube? Oh my god, did he really just do the hypercut to make him look good? Dude, this is the problem with like your whole politics being aesthetics. When your whole politics is aesthetics, anytime it's not literally like centered to make you look fantastic or could ever make you look bad or you get challenged, you gotta edit it out. Of course. Let me assume it's on Piers Morgan's show. Piers Morgan. Let me assume it's on his thing. Yeah, it is. It's a full cut. 9 minutes instead of the 5. Vladimir Putin fan is what they call him. Vladimir Putin fan.